Welcome, everyone, to another broadcast of The Soul of the Everyman on the Artis First Radio Network. All past shows are podcasts. Find them at artisfirst.com. We welcome your questions and comments. Please use DJ at artisfirst.com. And ladies and gentlemen, here they are, Michael and Margaret Lyons.
Thank you very much, Z-Man. I'm Michael Lyons.
And I'm Margaret.
And we're back.
Here we are.
It's like you can't get rid of us. And they've tried. Believe me, they tried. They've tried. They failed.
Oh my. Yes.
And you know why they failed?
No, why?
I don't know why either, actually. That went nowhere. Geez, that was a terrible segue. But tonight, we're going to have a very interesting topic that has nothing to do with that terrible segue.
All right.
You're supposed to pick that up.
Well, okay, we are going to talk about pain, so perhaps.
Leave me hanging here.
I see.
Well, pain, is it pain? I thought, well, maybe we will be talking about pain. But we have a quote from Eckhart. We're going to read it right away to leave you not in suspenders. And then we're going to get into it. But let's read the quote. But I thought the subject was a little bit, not really on pain, but on something else. But you
wanted a segue.
I wanted a segue. You're right. You know, I think maybe we should start over.
Right.
Thank you for that excellent segue. Would you like to essay the quote?
Sure. Do you want me to do the entire thing, or you want to break it up?
Let's go for the entire thing, and then we can break it up.
All right. Empathy with someone else's pain or lack and a desire to help need to be balanced with a deeper realization of the eternal nature of all life and the illusion of all pain. Then let your peace flow into whatever you do, and you will be working on levels of effect and cause simultaneously. Eckhart Tolle.
And I think this is a little, it's a little bit, it takes a little thinking about this quote, and we're going to spend some time on it, but I do agree with you. It has to be sort of broken down a little bit, because there's a bunch of things that Tolle, this is, I believe, from his book, or maybe one of his lectures, but what he's talking about broadly is empathy. And yes, empathy and compassion, which are very related subjects, are almost always related to someone else's suffering. You don't feel empathy for yourself, unless you're a narcissist of some type, but you feel empathy for others, or you feel compassion for others. And then it's the related term, which is much degraded, is sympathy. And we're not going to talk about sympathy here. And we've in the past talked about it a lot of times in other shows. And the difference, at least what we've always said, the difference between sympathy and empathy is that sympathy is, oh, it sucks to be you, moving on. And empathy is, literally, I feel your pain. I am you. I'm going to sit down with you and not do anything necessarily, but just be. So empathy is a being state. Compassion is a being state, and sympathy is much more of a ego state. Oh, geez, that's terrible, and kind of shoving that person away, kind of making sure there's a big separation between the sufferer and you, who are obviously, they're deserving and you're not of suffering, and they must have done something, or that must run in your family, kind of stuff. And making sure that there's a big gap. So sympathy enforces an ego wall, and empathy does not. Empathy embraces the sufferer,
Compassion in general, I mean, you yourself, you feel with passion. Compassion is with passion. In other words, you are with this person in that same intensity. Okay, it's not taking on the other person's life. you're just there reflecting back that, first of all, they're not alone in this pain or this loss. Someone else can see you in the pain and the loss. They're not afraid. They don't turn away from the pain or the loss. And that's what happens with sympathy. They stand there, they try to acknowledge as quickly as possible, oh, you're in trouble. Oh, I'm so sorry for you. And turn away because it's too painful for them.
Right.
And they're not really in the kind of pain that you happen to be burning in. They're in pain because their ego is uncomfortable.
Right.
And they don't know what to do or say.
They've been dragged out of their sort of insular bubble of everything's okay all the time, and you see suffering, you see pain, and the ego says, oh, well, that's them. That's not you. You're good, and there must be something wrong with them.
Well, sympathy basically says, they're dealing with that. Thank God it's not me, but we should be sympathetic towards them. There's some grain inside, like, it should help, but they can't identify with the fact that this could be you. There but for.
I'm reminded, this was a couple weeks ago, but there was a scripture passage of the widow's mite. People are familiar with the story. And succinctly what's happening there is that the widow is being observed contributing to the treasury of the temple. And there are many others contributing to the treasury of the temple, and they're all giving of whatever they have. And then the observation is made that here's this widow who puts in 2 coins of very little value, has given far more than all these other ones. And in fact, what the widow has done is shown a willingness, a compassion, an empathy, in essence, by putting that which she really needs as a offering to those who probably are maybe even less worse off than she. But the point is that she's giving something of great, out of her great need. She gives. The others give it out of their excess.
Right.
And sympathy is giving out of your excess. Like, oh yeah, here's a couple of coins. Oh, I love you. Gotta go.
I have an extra $5 bill in my pocket.
Yeah, and be very clear. There's nothing wrong with sympathy. It's an ego state. It's certainly better than reveling in another's pain, or just ignoring it completely. So there's some benefit. There's some benefit to giving from your excess to a charity. But when you show compassion or empathy or sacrifice, you're giving from that which you desperately need, perhaps yourself, or you're showing that you're able to bear the other's pain as though it were your own, and sit down and witness it and say, I am you. Not sympathy excludes. Giving a couple of coins to some charity says, oh yeah, I've done my part. Well, that's terrible, starving children and wherever. And here's my part. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. But you're not Mother Teresa. You're not going to Calcutta and putting yourself in great danger and in great sacrifice and recognizing the humanity of those others. That's empathy, compassion, sacrifice. I was going to mention sacrifice anyway. That's another one of these words that is in that same venue, and the sacrifice of giving of oneself for the other is an act of compassion, an act of passion and an act of compassion. So empathy is in that, in that venue, in that milieu of words that Tolle is talking about here. But he has this interesting take on it, and that's sort of, it's a little bit different. When you see another suffering, and Gautama very famously said, all life is suffering, and he had been raised in such an insular way that he had never seen suffering until he was, 30 or something silly like that?
He was an adult.
He was an adult, and he'd been raised so that he'd never seen any other human being suffering. His world was literally a bubble, okay? And he escapes this bubble, and he realizes that first of all, he's been living a lie, and secondly, that the true condition of humanity is this grinding, terrible suffering. And that struck him so deeply that he said, in essence, this famous phrase, all life is suffering. Well, yes, it is. You can look at it that way. But that's still sort of an ego state of all life is suffering. And totally takes another take here. He in this first paragraph, he literally says, yes, be empathetic, be compassionate, sacrifice, be with the person in suffering. This is incredibly important that you realize it, that you realize it within yourself, realize it within the other, realize that the other is you, and all those things. But then you can burn yourself out. You can completely, like Mother Teresa, completely empty oneself into the suffering of the world and, in essence, burn your body to a shred. And he says, rather than do that, balance it with an awareness. Be aware of the suffering, but balance the need that you see against the deeper realization that, yes, and this is where Buddha really ended up, was all life is suffering, but this is not the true life. This is the incarnation. This is the cycle of samsara. Am I right?
The cycle of reincarnation.
Reincarnation. Yeah. This is just one turn of the wheel. And the eternal nature of all life and the illusion of pain. So what you're seeing, though it is real, is still illusory from the point of view of the spirit. And that's what Tolle's take is here.
In his book, The Power of Now, he had divided up compassion into two different aspects. Compassion arising from the observation of the suffering of another life. You sense it, perceive it. And the second one is you sense the essence of the other person underneath their suffering. And to be able to do that, though, you have to be able to sense your own conscious essence. You have to abide in that, what he would call a transcendent dimension, where you can make the connection. Until you're able to sense your own consciousness, your conscious essence, until you touch into that, you're not going to be able to sense that essence in another person in their suffering. All you'll see is that surface and not be able to touch on their inner being state. So as he had said in that book, the idea is, yes, you have compassion for another, but you're not doing the suffering for them. In other words, sometimes when you're able to listen to somebody, they just keep coming to you because they want somebody to just keep venting on. And that's just not good for you. It drains you, and you're being used as a crutch at that point. So his advice is, do not lose yourself in this suffering. Don't be drawn in. You can't help another person if you focus only on their suffering. They just keep reliving it.
I want to go back, because that's what you said is so exactly perfect. You can become overwhelmed by the depths of compassion, by seeing the suffering, by being in the suffering, and that can, okay. The process, the suffering, as Tolle says sometimes in some of his works, the suffering is sort of a necessary gateway into awareness, and then consciousness, and then realization that this is only of this realm. Okay, so suffering is, you almost have to wear your ego out with suffering. So in seeing the suffering of another, even in consciousness and awareness, you can be drawn back from this state. You can be in essence re-engaging with egoic suffering,
drawn into it
at a compassionate level. The example would be, in essence, that you can relieve all suffering just by your touch. By, in essence, Margaret just said it, by taking it away from those, so that their suffering is gone and you suffer for all. This is the sacrifice of the cross in some ways.
All ways.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure that this is actually what's happening, but in essence, that's what the kernel of that suffering is, that it's once for all. But that's it, once for all. If you instead re-engage over and over again with this suffering as in compassion, in real conscious compassion of the suffering, you yourself are not allowing that other to rise up above it, to burn away their ego, to in essence become conscious and aware, because you're just taking away from them and you're unburdening them, and you yourself are re-engaging at the level of conscious suffering, and you aren't actually helping them. And you're not ever able to unburden your own self. You're in that state. So you certainly don't want to become callous to suffering. You want to see it for what it is, but you want to see it in awareness and say, yes, all the egoic suffering I see in this other is there. I feel deep compassion for it. But through the fog of their suffering, behind the clouds and all the occlusion of that suffering, you see the actual being. And in witnessing that presence beset by suffering, you feed that presence aspect. You let them realize that, yes, you are suffering in ego. And I am too, because we're both here in this vale of tears. But my conscious awareness realizes that this just is a temporary thing, that this just is a dark night of the soul, if you will.
Well, you're more than your suffering.
Far more than your suffering. And you look to the other and say, you are more than your suffering. This is not who you are. The problem with engaging at the compassionate level is it's still an identity. It's still, it's still who you are. I'm the compassionate sufferer. No. You are an eternal being who is currently incarnate in experience and in egoic suffering, and you recognize that the other is too an eternal being.
Well, you acknowledge the fact that you have been there.
Yes, that's
many times. You understand what it means to be trapped in this one viewpoint, and what you wind up doing is helping the other person begin to spread its wings of awareness. Mm. It reminds me very much of that story about the butterfly in the cocoon.
The chrysalis, yeah.
Yeah, the chrysalis. And there was a man who was watching this butterfly struggling to break that chrysalis. And he thought, oh, well, let me help this butterfly. And he actually cracked the chrysalis. And pretty much he freed the butterfly. But in doing that, the butterfly never developed the strength to be able to flap its wings and fly away. That is part of the evolution for this butterfly. It's got to struggle its way out of the chrysalis to be able to fly. Mm. And he thought well, all it has to do is dry its wings. Well, yeah, it's got wings, but no strength.
But no strength.
And that's what happens if you try to take the responsibility of cracking the chrysalis, crack the crib, onto yourself, and you do not allow this being that's trying to take a step into the next phase of its life to build. And yeah, it's probably in pain, but how else is it going to fly? And that is always the reminder for all of us. That is a small example of the repeated pattern on how we learn down here. It's built in, people, into this world.
And compassion sees the struggle. You see the struggle of the butterfly. You see the suffering of the other. You understand it intimately because you've experienced it, as Margaret said, many times. And you know that this is the necessary step. And is the step going to be, is it going to be their whole life in this suffering and then maybe never get there? Maybe, but you have to let them suffer. You sit there and you witness it and you feed their presence in the suffering.
Right.
Now, let me just digress from Christopher broke through. Okay, Christopher, our son, was suffering with leukemia, and many of his peers did too. They broke through that. And perforce, they were put into a situation of intense suffering and intense isolation. When you witness the other going through that, the compassion that rises, and you know who's compassionate and who's just sympathetic. That's where you get this discernment. When you're in those types of situations, it doesn't have to be a cancer ward, but in those types of situations, you know when you see sympathy and when you see compassion. You also know, undefinably, when somebody has broken through it. And yes, they're still, the situation doesn't change. No light goes on, ding, 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 you're through. No, there's nothing like that. It's an internal switch. An awareness comes over them, and no one knows how or why or when. But an awareness comes up in these children, and you witness it, that the light goes on, and they say, I am, you said it just a moment, I am greater than this. I am more than this. I am not my suffering. I am something completely different. I have risen above. I've cracked the chrysalis of the pain body, of suffering. They crack it so quickly because it is such an acute onset. They're thrust from basically everyday normalcy into the crucible, into the fire, into the pit. And you're thrust into it with them. Our previous show, or the week before perhaps, when you're suffering with someone like that, you're in the pit too. If you're walking through hell, you're in hell with them. That's the crucible. But then it cracks. It's undefinable. You have to go through it. If you've been through it, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, God bless you, you're going to be. But just go with me here for a moment. You feel that, you see that breakthrough, and then you don't want them to go back, because you can re-engage with your suffering. You can fall back into I am this and I am that. It's easy. It almost seductively calls you back. But once they break through, your job as a compassionate witness is to see it and feed it. And the suffering doesn't change. The situation doesn't change.
What you're feeding is their spirit.
Yeah.
Okay? It's not their situation.
Nope.
And it's not poor me. You are feeding their spirit and allowing for that consciousness to grow. And you're there to hold space for them, to allow them to grow.
Yeah. It's
not easy, because there's a certain broadness of mind. You've got to be out of your thinking body of how you feel.
You've got to be out of your mind, literally.
Yes. And completely in your heart, because to take these steps, you need the strength of heart to execute them, to hold space. It kills you. Everything you thought you knew, that's it, it's burned up. Ashes in your hand. But you're like, well, all right, done with that. This needs to be done for the soul. He's learning, and I'm here just to help him in any way that I can. Please, Lord, guide me in this, because I don't have this kind of wisdom. You open yourself up to that greater dimension of consciousness that contains this wisdom. There's immense wisdom there. And you wind up doing and speaking and observing things. You don't even know where that all came from. It certainly wasn't you.
No.
You're limited in your abilities. You know what you went through. But this depth of wisdom and courage and love, which is the foundation of all of this, allows for the foundation space for this soul, the spirit to be fed and the soul to grow, so that whatever decisions he's actually making, he can do them cleanly without pre-programming or other people's opinions, or, might have been right for someone else, but is it right for you? Again, you've got to struggle out of that chrysalis. This decision is on you, and you are the one who must bear the brunt of it. So you make it in consciousness, and therefore you again, building the strength to be able to fly.
And this Tolle's phrase is exactly, not in so many words, but this is what you go through. What you see in the other is that they come to a deeper realization of the eternal nature of all life. That part of the cracking of the chrysalis is right there. Part of the key is it cracks when you, either in witnessing and in compassion, see the other break through to that deeper realization. These kids broke through that their life had an eternal component. And yes, they of course were still in corporate, and some of them, certainly not every one of them passed away. But that deeper realization comes in. That's the crack. And that the illusion of pain, and this is, we wrote about this in Christopher's book, he realized at some point that the pain was, of course, real, but it was illusory. It wasn't an identity. You don't, when you're going through hell, don't set up shop. You keep walking. The pain is a present moment of pain, yes, absolutely, but it's also illusory because it doesn't identify you. It is not you the being, and it's ephemeral. It will pass, and it doesn't define you. And realizing that is the strength that lifts those wings. And once you're there, and once you get out, and once you're there in compassion, seeing that, you've got to feed that, not the pain, not all the stuff around it, all the this should have done this, should have done that, all that nonsense, all the sympathy nonsense. No. And when you're doing that, you do it, as Margaret just said, you have no idea in the mental or the emotional how you're doing any of these things. In fact, if you had to figure it all out, you'd still be thinking while it was all happening. No. Grace comes in. You open yourself up to that when you enter to the situation with compassion and empathy, because those states allow that to come in. You say, I am you. This is me. Open yourself to what feeds that ability to endure and to be and to get out of this, to walk through this, really, not get out of it, but to walk through it. And that comes in as grace in many different ways, through words, through actions, all kinds of things.
Well, the ability to come back to yourself, your consciousness, as well as touching back to the core of your being, the center of your heart, this is where courage resides.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're there, you know what you have to do. You may not like it. You may be afraid. But you know what you have to do.
The liking has nothing to do with it.
It's low man on the totem pole kind of thing. This is nothing asks you whether you like it or not, and they're going to change it because you don't like it. You gave that up the minute you took steps into this situation. You understood you're not going to like any of it. So, okay, there it is. But you don't go back to it and saying, well, I don't like this, I don't like this, I don't like this. Like, it's not about you. You're not the one suffering. You know, it's the man looking at the chrysalis going, oh, let me help him. If I crack it more, if I loosen it, he'll be just fine if I could just take that chrysalis off him. And what happens? He dies. The butterfly dies. Because you took a hand not acknowledging the wisdom of the process, the cycle.
The struggle.
Mm-hmm. It is the eternal nature of all life down here. And it is the illusion of pain. So, even Christopher, I still remember, he floored me when he looked at me and said, it's only pain, Mom. I'm fine. Like, okay.
And this is out of a 7-year-old at the time.
Mm-hmm. And it had to do with, it's not just like a little boo-boo that was happening. We were talking about real pain, that they were ready to give him the heavy drugs. But it's like, nah, it's only pain.
He had already become strong enough. The other thing, a part of the struggle, you know, and you say relieve it, you know, somehow take the burden away. No, it's an honor, it's a privilege, not to suffer. But it's when you have it upon you, the honor of the action, the requirement of that moment of now, is that you own that. This is what's happening.
The appropriate action for the moment. It is an honor to execute, because it takes an immense amount of strength and wisdom to discern this. So you happen to be there, and God help me get through this.
But I want to stop you right there. That's the word that it needs to be emphasized. It's an honor. People say, what do you mean it's an honor? You will, in every life, or in as many lives as you go through here, you may have little to no struggle. And you say, oh, that's what I want. I like that. I like that. But that just means that you're in the chrysalis. You're still in the cocoon. You're still in the illusion. You're going to come round again. When you're at the point where the chrysalis is cracking, and it's time to evolve. Now it's time to go to the next level. That's an honor. And it's not easy. None of it's easy. It looks terrible if you're looking at it with the egoic eyes, with the, I don't like that. That looks terrible. Oh, sympathy. Oh, it sucks to be you. I'm just going to write you a little card and put a couple of shekels in and move on. No. You honor their experience by sitting down in compassion and being there and feeding the spirit to endure, to walk through hell and walk through it with them, and to burn all the other things away. That's hard. And honoring, in living it with honor in the heart and with courage, which is very closely related, and having the courage to be there with that person, whomever they are, and feed their spirit as they go through it, and know that they are you. This is why we're here. None of the other stuff is why we're here. This is why we're here. And yeah, people say, "Oh man, that sounds hard." Yep. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. But you're moving through a process of evolution. You're not here to, play video games or collect cars. That's fun. Not why you're here.
Well, I'd like to go back to the fact that Tolle is talking about the connection on the transcendent layer that connects humanity. That's the phrase he uses. And when you are walking with another person through this conflict, horror, pain, stress, whatever you want to call it, have you ever wondered why that happens, what that does? Because when it's you singularly, your mind has a tendency to just think about what I am going through. But when you are there with another, it defines another dimension. You widen your consciousness from the first to a second dimension. And you can go back and forth and begin to see, wait, it's not just about me. I see it in other kids. They're going through the same thing. Or seeing their mothers. It's like, oh wait, my mother's going through that too. With every person, you add another dimension to your consciousness. That is the transcendent layer that he's referencing. You can see that there is a commonality in the feel and the understanding of the situation where it's going to be hard. We know it's going to be hard. And yeah, you might be crying or fighting it, but you also know that, okay, I'm going to fight. That's the other question that always is. What is your decision on this next step? Where do you want to be? How would you like to take the next step? Some people say, okay, I don't want to fight anymore. I want to go and take the rest of time that you say I have and enjoy whatever. And they're only too happy to do that. But that wasn't our experience. It was fight, fight, fight.
It certainly was.
All the way through.
Yeah.
And to understand that flame, you've got to understand that is a fire of the soul. So if your child wants to fight, and the doctors are telling you, we've done everything, you should just take him home and let him, enjoy what little life he has left. And believe me, we did have doctors who told us this. And we spoke with him because it's his life. What do you want to do, my love? It's like, no, I'm going to continue fighting, even though the odds are dwindling. I'm fighting. So we continued to fight. We let him lead, and we supported him all the way through. And this is what I mean by not sticking your hands in and trying to crack the chrysalis.
Right.
His will to fight is courage, and he has the wisdom. He has the wisdom to make the choice. That's the other thing. Some of the doctors just said, well, don't you make the choice. You don't let him make that choice. Like, no, you don't understand. It would be easier for them. We'd be out of their hair. They wouldn't have to consider us anymore. Well, much easier for them, mind you. But going back, understanding that the relationship that you have with the others expands your dimension of consciousness from first, which is a singular, it's just you, to second dimension. So now you have length, To a third person, now you have depth. Fourth person, now you have time. You begin to see how it all plays together. And frankly, that expansion of personal consciousness to a broader state, this may be the reason why we were created.
Well, I'd say more than maybe. I'd say that is it.
God wanted to be able to have another to expand his creation, his love, his expression.
Well, and I agree with you, but there was so many things in there. Honoring the decision was also part of the compassion. So you mentioned it. You let the person who is the sufferer realize that they still have control over one thing. Everything else is out of control. One thing they always have control of is the decision of what to do next.
Yes.
Not outcomes. Again, we've always talked about this. Your decision, your honor of that other person's will and free will, doesn't mean that we get the outcome we're looking for, because you shouldn't be looking for outcomes. You have to be looking for the moment of now, feeding that, realizing that the decision is always yours, that you draw joy and strength from that, that suffering that you're going through, and Margaret said, the singular suffering, the egoic suffering is the point, if you will. To expand that becomes a relationship. That's what we're here for. Even though you say, oh gosh, you don't have a relationship with suffering, it's not the relationship with suffering, it's the relationship which may include suffering or not, but the expansion of one's awareness to the other, seeing the eternal in both. The compassion doesn't have to be around pain. You can have full compassion with the other in boundless joy. If you see in the boundless joy the presence of the other, not identify even with happiness. People say, I don't want to be identified with my suffering. We don't want to be identified with your happiness either. It's not about that. It's about being aware of the relationship at the being level. The suffering is the quicker road. Okay, it seems like the more horrible road, but if you're going to get into relationship, suffering gets you there quicker. Why? Because somehow that draws us together. You see the other in suffering. It draws forth the instinct for compassion, which people cut off into sympathy. Because the instinct for compassion comes from the being and from the spirit. And the sympathy is the ego's interruption quick before we get, goodness gracious.
Don't get too close.
Don't get too close. It'd be terrible.
Mm-hmm.
And the privilege, the honor of being there and being with the other is, you mentioned it, it's getting into the relationship, into the being state, into the awareness of spirit incarnate in this world is what we're here for, and moving from the limited, egoically bound, clouded vessel into the awareness of who and what we really are, come from spirit eternal in the moment of now, moves you into the enlightened state. It moves you into spirit. It moves you into God. And Christ's words, heaven upon earth, people interpret it very differently, but it's truly to say that you realize who you really are, even though you happen to be here, and all of a sudden it's not that nothing here matters. It all matters, but it matters in such a different way. But before we go too far, Ma, I just don't want to miss the second part. We've kind of spent the first part, but it's very pithy. But the second part of Tolle's quote here is also very important. You said, then let your peace, but I cut it off a little bit. But then let your peace flow into whatever you do. What does that mean? The realization that all pain is illusion, that all life is suffering, but it's also illusory suffering. The realization that you are an eternal being in a current moment of now brings you peace. It brings you a type of joy which is beyond happiness, far beyond happiness. It brings you into direct communion with the Spirit, and you then become a conduit. He very explicitly says flow. And he says your peace, but it's really let peace, which flows from external to the incarnate soul and mind and emotions, grace, peace, you become a channel for flow, and you bring it, and all around you, however occluded and clouded and egoically bound they may be, and you were as well, feel it. And if you're in the presence of, in compassion, in presence of another who is suffering, it's like the peace that flows in infuses that whole moment of now. It into whatever you do, but it's whatever the called for action is. It's done in wholeness, in peace, with heart, courage, and compassion, in honor, and all that comes in as a flow. And then you can walk through hell with grace. And it's not hell anymore, it's just walking through hell. There's a very big difference between hell and walking through hell. Hell is identification. You're there and you are hell. Walking through hell is, in the moment of now, this is terrible. No one wants to stay here. You shouldn't stay there. You need the strength and the grace and compassion and the free will to take the next step. And when Christopher was going through what he was going through and what we were going through the hell with him, there was the next step was into the void or into the unknown. It was hell, but you keep taking the next step. And if you have peace, it's not like the next step is, it's not easy, but you do it in strength. You do it with grace. You don't know where your foot's going to land, but it doesn't matter anymore because you know that your being and your presence will be there with you.
The eternal is with you with every step that you take. When you have come to that point of consciousness, that consciousness is part of a divine consciousness. And once you acknowledge that, once you understand, well, it's not about me and what control I think I have. It is, I am here now with you in this being state. And we will continue walking, even though everybody around us is basically saying, it's all for naught. They want you to despair.
Give up.
And you sit there and you go, no. You're not in charge of life and death, even though you believe that somehow you have the power of life and death. And I think we said this before. The opposite of death is not life. It's birth. It's what you do in between birth and death that is your life. And other people are not in charge of that, even though they want to say they are. They want to tell you, cut the cord right here. This is where you're supposed to die. No. You can't do that. You only die when it's time. And people want to say they have that power. It's frankly hubris. It's an arrogant thought that the ego wants to say, well, I have power over my life and my death. Like, you have power to make your decision about life and how you're going to engage in it. And have you engaged in life, or has it always been this one-dimensional I? It's all about me.
Well, then that is a superpower. And Margaret, the last part of his phrase here, let peace flow into whatever you do. But this is also extremely, Totally always chooses his words. And you will be working on the levels of effect and cause simultaneously. What does that mean? Okay, now, he never says things that he doesn't mean. People always say cause and effect, right? It's cause first and then effect, right? No. When you talk about the moment of now, cause and effect are not really meaningful, because cause and effect implies control. Mm-hmm. I did this, I'm going to get that. I put the coin in, I get a gumball. That's cause and effect, right? No. In the moment of now, if you're letting your peace flow into whatever you do, you just take a decision. I am going to do this. This is how I'm going to feel. This is not me, the situation, not me, the suffering. I am me, the being, in free will, and in presence, I decide I'm going to do this. That isn't, I'm going to push this button and that light's going to go on, which means cause and effect. It means in the moment of now, what needs to be done. We've said this many times. In the moment of now, you're exactly where you're supposed to be, doing what you're exactly what you're supposed to be doing, experiencing exactly what the moment of now brings. This is it. It's where everything happens. And the one superpower you have is you get to decide what to do next. Not what happens next. Not what outcome is going to occur.
No, you have the power of choice.
Choice, and this is where people get all conflated. They get all screwed up. Well, I'm going to name it and claim it. I'm going to choose, and that's what's going to happen. I'm going to do cause and effect. No. You're presented with the moment of now. In your hearts of hearts, in your grace, in your peace, you ask, and it's instantaneous, but you say, what needs to be done now? What do I need to do? And then you have the decision, because you get informed, this is what needs to be done, but you are not told to do it. You are offered the honor of doing it or not.
You are given discernment and clarity of vision to be able to see clearly without the constraints of emotion or blame.
Or thought.
Or, yes, thought. Without ego.
Without ego.
Because you are looking for what is best for the one I love. It has nothing to do with you and what you happen to be feeling at that moment. Your whole being is consumed with an unconditional love. Whatever is needed to happen to help this one that I love dearly. What do I need to see? And then your heart guides you on pathways. Everybody thinks, oh, well, I have to do something. It's like, no. You have to be first in that state of peace and the broadness of what is. And see with clarity. And then the heart will guide you on what needs to be done or not done next.
And just, I want to say it because in the moment that it needed to be, I won't put it in those terms, but you know what I mean. In the moment that it needed to be, the hardest thing that had to be done is not what you want. It's that you witness what needs to be done, and you do it for the other,
right,
in compassion and strength. And you witness their being rise up. And you're there, burning, walking through hell of that moment. But you're doing exactly what needs to be done. And it's so right. And right isn't even the term. It's so correct. It's such of the moment of now that it rings an eternal tone. It adds to the song and symphony of your song and the universal symphony of all vibrations. And you're just there. You're just another piece of the universal vibration, but you did exactly what needed to be done. And it becomes an honorable eternal moment, which it goes into the heavens, if you must, if you want to put it that way. It gets written on the book, and it's always there. And because you chose is the important point. You always have the choice not to, but you choose. You chose.
You choose to live the truth of the moment, and you do not deviate, no matter how much you may like it or dislike it, or you may be in pain. It's only pain.
Mm-hmm.
The truth of the moment is eternal, and you choose the eternal because you realize there's so much more to being in this life, expressing it, loving. And on that note, we have reached the end of our hour.
Eternal moment of the end. And I'm Michael Lyons.
And I'm Margaret. Thank you for listening.